There she is. So welcome along to Kylie, Rod, and Russell, and welcome to you if you're watching later on. So started reading another book. Surprise,
Ooh,
surprise. And interesting enough, Jock's in the middle of reading this book as well. So this is Canoeing the Mountains. That'll get you interested, won't it? It's a very Boys Brigade
uh,
sounding book, isn't it, Rod?
it
Canoeing.
does. Interesting. Yep. The
Um,
rapids might have been interesting, but mountain sounds a challenge.
so I got this because I'd been part of the Project Plenty Children's, Youth, Young Adults and Families Discipleship Working Group. Jock got it because they wanted someone to do a book review on it. So he's desperately reading it so he can do a book review on it. So we're going to explore some of the ideas about out of that with some other things that have come up in the last few weeks. And I'm just working out where to start. Let's start with this. So a couple of weeks ago, we had Amplify conference. And as part of the opening part of Amplify, they had Dr. Ruth Powell present some material from the NCLS, the National Church Life Survey. And part of it, she said, there's this warning that we have lost, the church has lost those who are 30 and under, that generation. How do you feel about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Just too busy.
Yep, they're very busy.
Interesting statement. What's the and the same goes for the girls. What's the ratio of leadership by age? And I would say Boys Brigade says something's doing a good job because most of our leaders are early 30s or under.
Yep. Yeah. So I think one of the things that Brigade shows is that their leadership development is doing well. But yes, broader outside of the church. Now, would it surprise you if I said that that warning came out 30 years ago?
Yeah. No.
And Ruth Powell's comment was, and 30 years on, we've lost everyone from the 60s down. So sense of, if you look at most churches, you have smatterings in the 50s, 40s, 30s, so on, but there's this huge gap that we have. So the sense of 30 years ago, we had this warning, hey, we're not connecting the 30-year-olds. We didn't really change much. And we find ourselves in a similar situation, but with everyone below 60. So this is one of the challenges that we face. And so Canoeing the Mountains, wonderful book. He starts by talking about the fact that we're now in a position where, as leaders of the church, we don't know what we're doing. That the world is changing. And in that sense, we were trained for a Christendom model, and the world is changing around us, and we don't necessarily have the answers, and we don't necessarily know what we're doing. And he draws on the story of the Lewis and Clark expeditions through America. So Lewis and Clark were given the job by Jefferson of going and finding the river connection between the west and the east. So they said, surely there's this river that will connect across, and whoever gets that first, they'll sort of be the ones that their nation. So you've got the French, you've got the English, you've got the Americans, you've got the Spanish, all trying to find this. And so Lewis and Clark, they go up the Missouri, and they eventually get to the sort of inlet of the spring of the Missouri, and they think we'll just get to this top of these hills, and then we'll see the nice flowing down river to the Pacific, because that's logically what's going to happen. We know how landforms are, we know what happens in Europe and stuff, and this is surely what we'll find. And so they climbed to the top of that hill, and they discovered the Rockies, these huge mountains, and it was like, okay, everything we knew has just gone out the window. Being a historian reminds me very much, and when I was a boy watching Bill Peach's The Explorers series on the Australian, Rod's old enough to know. Kylie, it was on ABC, so Kylie's family wouldn't have watched it, and Russell's far too young to have Ever heard of Bill
Yes.
Peach? But that sense of lots of our explorers went in to find the inland lake, because logically there had to be all this water in the middle of Australia, which we know is bunkum. But that was the logic.
Well, the logic was that water in the middle of Australia flowing out to the edge.
Yes,
It ain't
yes.
happen. It's the other
No,
way.
that's right.
All
And
we
so,
know.
so Australia is, it's true as well, but this story from America, here were these people that had these ideas of this is the solution. We just need to find this river because obviously it's going to be there, and suddenly we need to rewrite the whole thing, which is the challenge of where we find ourselves as church. That since about 300 AD through to the middle of last century, the church was the center of society. The church had a major part. And so, of course, everyone went to church. That was what you did. And so we didn't have to work hard to bring people in. And suddenly we've had this flip where 30 years ago, suddenly the things we were doing, and we went, oh, well, hang on. If we remember back, we used to have big Sunday school classes. So we just need to get back to that. And we've spent 30 years trying to get back to that. And we find ourselves in a situation, well, whoever it is that says, the definition of an insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. It's like, maybe the little tweaks, the little changes aren't what needs to happen. So that challenge of we find ourselves now in this space where we need to change. You've probably heard me say before, Phyllis Tickle talked about if you look through the history of the church and the history of culture, every 500 years there's a major change. So you go back 500 years and you hit the Reformation, the introduction of the printing press, whole radical changes in life. 500 years before that, you have the great schism between the Eastern and the Western churches. You have the words aren't coming into my head, but lots of tribes and stuff coming in and invading the Roman Empire, and it's sort of falling apart. 500 years before that, you have Leo the Great sort of fighting off, I want to say Genghis Khan, but it's not. It's the other one that I always get mixed up with him. But yes, you have some invading tribes and all for that. 500 years before that, you have Jesus. 500 years before that, you have the exile to Babylon. 500 years before that, you have King David, so on and so forth. So every 500 years, there seems to be these radical changes. And we find ourselves in this place where we're in the middle of one of these radical changes. And so the things that we knew no longer work. And we need to start to go, well, what's something new? We've had our canoes, we've come up the river, we've had our plan, there's no other river. What do we do? So let me find the other couple of little quotes and then we can have a chat about it. So I was interested, he notes Leslie Newbigin, who was missionary and bishop in India in the 1970s, came back to England, and he wrote, England is a pagan society. The development of a truly missionary encounter with this very tough form of paganism is the greatest intellectual and practical task facing the church. So 1970s, Newbigin is saying, we no longer live in a society that understands religion. You've probably heard me use the example before. When we were in the Upper Hunter, a couple of times we had Youth for Christ come into the high school at Merriwar and do a presentation day. And we would come in as sort of small group leaders. And in one of the sessions, it started to talk a little bit about God. And what's your view of God? What do you think of when you talk about God? And after each session, we'd have a debrief with all the leaders. And one of the old guys from our church is like, oh, I was just shocked. I asked them, what do you think about God? And they had no answer and they didn't know anything. And it's like, we who work with young people know that's the case. But for many people, this news of Newbigin, that's what? We live in a pagan society? Surely not. Or they don't think we're as far along as we did. But back in the 70s, New Beginners going, we need to become a missional church. We need to be reaching out. And missional became a sort of catch cry through the last couple of decades of a missional church who is saying we need to be doing something different. Christopher Wright, not sure who he is, but he says, it's not so much that God has a mission for his church in the world, but that God has a church for his mission in the world. That sometimes we get caught up with what's our job out there, but sometimes we need to go, what's God doing out there that we as a church need to be engaged with? He notes that seminaries that produced pastors to be the resident expert in biblical studies, theology, and church history, the resident professional for teaching, counselling, and pastoral care, and the local manager of the church business and bureaucracy are reconsidering both the demands of the current curricular expectations and the challenges of their changing world around us. So they're going, oh, we used to train our leaders in all these sorts of things. That's no longer what we need to do. So yeah, so there's some ideas about the change in our world. What does that spark? Do you want to fight back and say, no, it's all rubbish? Is it what you're seeing around you? What do you think? Russell.
I guess
No, sorry.
No. You go. You
Okay.
had your hand nicely up. You're being polite.
I'm in that category of 30s to whatever.
Yep.
Like I've stuck around for. I'm like the only one that stuck around. Well, so like most not the only one, but like some, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, we see everything. Another statistic, research suggests that the move from high school to university, we hold on to about 33%. So we
That's
hold
not
on to
much.
about that's not much. So it's about a third.
Yeah.
That's yeah, it's a really shocking statistic of, that's really bad. You want at least half, that's pass. The third's nowhere near it.
but it's a third of whatever you have, which
Yes.
may not be much to start with. Yep.
Well, yes. Sorry, you were going to say a minute ago, Rob.
Back at my notes. So to help us out, what is it that we should be training our ministers, our pastors, whatever we're going through, theological colleges, what is it that we should be training them to do? Do they have the answer or the suggestion for that, or is that for us to find out?
And I think that's part of the struggle that we find ourselves in. We don't actually know fully where the church is headed. We're in this in-between space where it's about throwing out experiments. So maybe it's about how do we train our ministers to be doing experiments, to be trying new things, as opposed to here's how you preach a good sermon, here's how you lead a good church council meeting, or whatever.
Yeah.
So maybe so yes, partly it's we don't know the answer. So we're not quite. So of course, then theological colleges go back to, well, we know the old answer, so we'll just stick with that. But yes, it's about how do we train for new things and that ability to do new things and to bring change. Does that help?
I can see that's the intention. I can see the danger. Obviously, Martin Luther thought his was the correct voice to be listened to, or he was listening to the correct voice, and hence Reformation. Have a danger here that in changing but not knowing how to change, are we listening to the right voice? Are we being led astray? Are we doing the wrong things? Whether it's our story of the wise or the foolish girls as of last week, and the revelation that maybe one of them were the wrong voice speaking and being followed. So that's the danger I see here too. Unless you know what we're going to step into, experimenting may create a lot of things that look good but are not what they should be.
Yep.
And I'm not sure who then judges, who can then judge that it's not good before it gets too far out of hand, head in the wrong direction.
Yep. And that's definitely a danger, is always Who are we listening to? Where are we going? I think for me, that's why on a theological spectrum, I like to read from both sides to go, okay, I don't necessarily agree with this side. They're too conservative for me, but what are they saying and how do they need to pull me back into somewhere in the middle? Like,
Yep.
One of our theology lecturers was always, it tends to be sort of a both end. It's never one of the extremes. It's usually somewhere in the middle. So yes, but yes, definitely, how are we discerning, how are we going, where is God leading us, as opposed to, oh, this looks like a good idea over here. Yes,
Yeah.
we need to be careful, definitely. Russell, you had your hand up a minute ago. Filling your
We
head.
don't want to burn out our pastors, ministers, all that. Like, honest to God, I think Jock actually talked to me about this. That our like we have to cut down services and I guess carpooling and all that stuff. And there's a lot of anger, or you know,
Yep. Yep.
I don't want to do this because she can't get to the service because this happens, and you know.
Yep.
But I've said to Jock that I'm happy to do like the PA and stuff, so he doesn't have to go down and you know do his mic again and up and down, you know.
Yep. He was telling us that on today. So we've
Yes.
been talking about you, Russell. Watch
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah, and definitely, and that's why we're changing services. So the change in services isn't so much about we don't have enough staff to cover 4 services on a Sunday, but it's about if we actually cut back some of those services, we can start to do some new things. And the thing we discovered with the family service was as we experiment with this new thing, wow, we're actually connecting with a whole heap more people than we thought we were. And here's this opportunity. What are some other groups that we might be able to start to engage with? If we go, well, we've got 4 services on Sunday that all look the same. So what if, or very similar, what if we cut those back to 2? We can easily fit everybody into 2 locations. Then we can start to do things midweek or other things on Saturday afternoons or whatever. So yes, it's about, for Southside, it's about how do we look after our leaders, and not just the ministry team, but all of our leaders, and how are we finding the space to do the new exciting things, the new things. But as Rod said, making sure that we're listening to go, where is God leading us? Not just going, hey, this church over here is doing this, let's do that. And that can often be the danger of, we just go, what's the latest new idea? To which we went a couple of weeks ago, the ministry team and a couple of people from church council, to a session on amalgamations with, and I thought his name would have popped in my head by the time I got to this point of the sentence, but Phil McCredden, wonderful. Thank you, Rod.
Or something like that.
Rod wasn't even there, but he remembers his
wasn't
name. I've
there.
had numerous conversations with him, but Phil McCredden, and Phil was saying, if someone comes to you and wants to sell you the answer, they're probably trying to sell a book. By that sense of, if someone has the answer, they probably don't. They've got their wonderful idea. So that sense of, yes, there are a whole heap of things out there, but we need to be listening in wisely and going, where are the ways God's leading us? And where are just, that's a lovely idea. And sometimes that's a lovely idea and that works over there. Sometimes that's a lovely idea and that works at the church down the road, but it doesn't actually work in our church. So yes, it can be a struggle.
I know for education, we have 3 tiered things. Of the top one is it's your outcomes that everyone in Australia has to teach to. But then it's got, on the next pages, it's got like, these are ways that you can teach that. And so I think as a church, as a thing, we need that, okay, like the Apostles' Creed and all that is our top. This is what everyone believes. But then here's different ways, depending on your community, depending on your whatever, that you can achieve those goals And in that way, hopefully, listening to the right people at the top for the top part, we should, I don't know.
Yep. And that's, yeah, I guess that's where you have that sense you should always have, as the parable of the wise and foolish builders, the other wise and foolish, that sense of making sure you're always building on the foundation. So that's why, you know, theologically, I would talk about myself as an evangelical, now the other word's gone out of my brain. No, it's gone. Not radical, but thinking of new things. Progressive, a progressive evangelical.
Progressive.
So I move into the progressive realm. I'm definitely not down the far end of we just chuck the Bible out and have wonderful thoughts. For me, it's still we ground our thoughts on the Bible, but we think about how do we read the Bible and how are we interpreting it, all those sorts of things. But yeah, so yes, we need what are those solid things? Apostles' Creed, the Bible, prayer, things like that help us to know, yes, we can go down this track. No, that's a really bad idea. Got about 1 minute if anyone has another thought. Rod.
What was your third one, Kylie? Outcomes, ways to teach, or was ways to teach the third one?
It's
Sorry.
I should know this off the top of my head. I'll email it to you.
Yep. Okay. Yep. But when I looked at the topic, Richard, I was thinking, hopefully on the topic, but in a very different terms. And one of the things is the strangeness of the physical world these days to have people do things physically. They don't currently do that in many activities that we do. Yep. Taking kids on a virtual world. And it was interesting on the camp. Kylie was seeing this on the camp. There was poster making, but it ain't what you thought it was. It was computer online poster making, and the ability to do things online, and therefore to put your CGI. Had the kids fascinated by CGI. So there's virtual world in both senses that you're online, but it's also things that aren't real but look as if they are. And one of the things is we seem to be, although we always had that opportunity, to say printing press came out years ago. These days now it seems to be, no, just go look it up. So you go look after yourself reading something online, whether it's a legal thing, whether it's how to do something, whether it's the Bible or whatever. Yep. It's all there. The answers are there. Go look at it, rather than me explaining it to you. It seems to be an attitude thing. You know, your customer service, whether it's retail, banking, or whatever, is it's all online. Just fill the form out, do this, do that. There's nothing personal about the way we do things in many situations.
Yep.
I hope the church doesn't get down that track. If that's the way the house is going, hopefully we will maintain that relationship and helping people understand it, rather than say there's a book that says how to do it. Go read that one. Online, of course, because you don't want to waste paper.
That's right. You don't. Yes, you'll use Kindle or whatever. That sounds like a really good conversation. Let's have that conversation next week.
Okay.
Just so that you can go to your group that's meant to be starting right now.
Yes, and there was a prayer for them this week, which was lovely. So
it was.
I will disappear.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us. We'll talk about online stuff and how that world's changed next week. So if you want to be part of that conversation and you're watching it at another time, join us at 7 o'clock. We'd love to have 5 on the screen next week.
That would be great.
I will see you all later. Thanks for joining me. Good week.
Bye all.